Let's now go back to the php.net again and look at the parameters. Next one is the length. If length is omitted, it removes everything from offset to the end of the array, which is what we just experienced. If length is specified and is positive, then that many elements will be removed. Well, let's try this one. We go to the editor, and now rather than -3, let's use index 1, which is this French. And how many items do we want to remove? Let's say 2 of them. So what that should do, basically, it should remove French and German. We should only get English, Spanish, and Polish. But let's give it a try in the browser. So if we refresh the page, and there we go, fair enough, English, Spanish, and Polish. Just to explain this once again, what happens when we actually using the second and third argument? We're specifying where do we start splicing, basically. We want this to be our index, the item with index or key 1. We know that that English is at 0 item by default, French is at 1. So this is where we're going to start splicing, basically. So our French is the item we start in the operation from. And how many items do we want to remove from this specific offset? Which is the length, third argument. How many items? 2. So French and German will basically be removed. If I specify that I want 3 items, then we should also get rid of the Spanish here. If we now save it and preview it in the browser, refresh, and we only have now English and Polish that we can actually see in the browser. As you can see, 3 items. If I only want 1 item to be removed, then we only should get rid of the French, which is basically at index 1. And there we go. Fair enough. That's exactly what we're getting. Let's go back to the specification and read what else can we actually do with this third argument. If length is specified and is positive, then that many elements will be removed, which is what we just did. And then next sentence says, if length is specified and is negative, then the end of the removed portion will be that many elements from the end of the array. Well, it's a big complex sentence here. Let's give it a try actually and see what it's going to do. If we go to our editor and let's try with the negative. So we know that we want index 1 French, but we are specifying -1. Let's see what's going to happen. So back to our browser, refresh, and wow, what's happened here? We've got first and the last item. Okay, let's go back to the editor and see what actually has happened. So we've specified the first index, and then we specified -1. So what's happened here? We're specifying that we want to splice at the beginning, and the length doesn't specify how many items from the index I want to splice, but how many items from the end of this array I want to keep. So basically anything between the first index and the last item in the array, I want to be removed. So all these 3 items. If I specify this as -2, then what do you think is going to happen? Well, we should keep English because it's at index 0. At 1 we have French, so that is definitely going to go. And then from the end, we should keep the last 2 items. So Spanish and Polish should be here. So effectively, we should only remove this French and German. So let's go and see if that's exactly what it does in the browser. And sure enough, that's what we're actually getting. So now I think you're getting a better idea of what this negative here, this length, does. So basically anything between the index and from the end of the array, basically. So 2 items from the array -2, 2 items from the array stay, and the first item, only the item with index 0, stays from the beginning. So basically French and German goes. Anything that's in between. So that's what happens basically with when we specify the negative value as the third argument for the length. Let's go back to the browser again, to the specification. And then it gives us a tip here to remove everything from offset to the end of the array when replacement is also specified. Use count input for length. Count function, which is what we will have a look at very shortly, basically counts how many items there are in the array. And if we go back to our editor, obviously we have how many items? 5 items. Even though they start from index 0, there's still 5 items actually in the array. So count, if we use this count function, and then languages will basically dynamically count the number of the items in the array. If at some point we added more items, that would automatically update the result as well. And now I want to add a few items to this specific array. Let's use this other syntax for the array. So rather than just having this array, I'm going to now use the square brackets, which I actually prefer over the array keyword. And let's add, let's add a few languages. Let's put Portuguese and Japanese. Okay, so now what should happen? Basically, we've got our array, which has 5 items. We start at index 1, so French. And I know that count is 5. So basically, even though count is more than the number of items that we're going to be removing, it's actually going to remove everything from this array. And then add basically these new items that I want, that are passed as the 4th argument to this array splice. So what we should effectively get is English, then Portuguese and Japanese. That's what we should get. So if I now save it and preview it in a browser, go back to our project, and there we go. Fair enough, we've got at index 0, we've got English, at 1, we've got Portuguese, and at 2, we have Japanese. So if we go back to our editor, now if I specify this at index, say 3, then obviously we are going to have English, French, and German. At 3, we have Spanish, so obviously Spanish and Polish will be removed, and then these 2 items will be added to the end of this array. So let's go back to the browser, refresh it, and there we go. That's exactly what happens. So let's go back to our parameters here. And the replacement. If replacement array is specified, then the removed elements are replaced with elements from this array, which is basically what we did earlier as well. If offset and length are such that nothing is removed, then the elements from the replacement array are inserted in the place specified by the offset. Note that keys in replacement array are not preserved, which is basically what we've been experiencing with all these functions so far. So if we go back to the editor, and now what I'm going to do is specify 0 as the 3rd argument. So the length is 0, meaning we are starting at index 3, which is basically going to be at this Spanish, but I don't really want to remove anything. I want to just add at this index 3. So what do you think is going to happen? Well, let's have a look at this. Let's save it and have a look at this in the browser. If we refresh the page, there we go. So at index 3, I started adding. So these 2 new items have been added starting from index 3. And then the ones which were actually Spanish was originally an index 3 got the new index after basically automatically incremented after the last value added from this replacement array. So that's exactly how you actually add items to the array at the specific position in array. So if we go back to our array splice, it also says that if replacement is just one element, it is not necessary to put array around it. So if we go back to our editor, if it's just Portuguese, then you can just ignore it. You don't have to wrap it with array or square bracket, which is obviously equivalent. You can just put it like this. So we only want to put Portuguese at index 3, and then Spanish and Polish is going to go right after. So if we go back to the browser, now refresh, there we go. We only have Portuguese, which came now at index 3, then Spanish on 4, and Polish got the index of 5. So if we go back to the editor, and that's pretty much everything in this video. So now that we know how to add items to the array at the beginning, at the end, and at any other index in the array, I think it's time to have a look at some other functions which can help us actually manipulate the arrays, retrieve specific items from the array, everything done using built-in PHP functions.